discussion on rotator cuff injuries. This is more related to my coaching background, online kind of consulting work than the injury work. But many times when people have been told they have a full thickness tear in one of their rotator cuff muscles, usually the supraspinatus, what ends up happening is the person will be told the only way they're ever going to get better is with surgical repair. Okay. Um, I was contacted a little while back by a gentleman in his 60s, a full thickness tear of the rotator cuff and supraspinatus on the one side, according to MRI. And what he was asking me that question, do I need to have surgery? And so I did some research, because he said that the surgeon that talked to him about it told him, you're going to need surgery. And I said, well, if you look at some of the literature that's becoming more available around these things, there is some chance that surgical intervention can be avoided, because really it comes down to function and symptoms. It's not necessarily that particular muscle it needs to be fixed, sewn together, reattached, however they do it. It's more, can we get him in a situation where he can restore better function of that shoulder and have a big reduction in the symptoms it's giving him. Typically, it's trying to sleep and getting the arm overhead, doing certain things. So I said, hey, the worst thing that happens is you end up still having surgery down the road. You can always have surgery. Surgery comes with setback and a long recovery. So we can do one of two things. We can say, hey, go have surgery and then work through the long recovery, and you may not even end up feeling any better, because there's a lot of times people have those procedures and they don't show improvement for one reason or another. But then the other part of this, hello everyone, the other part of this is, can we just start doing some work to improve function and see what happens? And I always keep these things very simple and straightforward for people when I am doing like a rehabilitation effort or a restoring a function effort in a shoulder situation. I say, hey, first thing we're going to do, and this, we kept it very simple and did a few exercises, but first thing we're going to do is hang. We're just going to hang from a pull-up bar. You're going to spend some time hanging with your hands this way. You're going to spend some time hanging with your hands this way. You're going to play with different widths. You can have your feet on the floor in the beginning, but the first thing is accumulate time hanging with that arm overhead, and active and passive positions. We went through all that. Then the second thing I was having him do is pressing something from behind the head. And I know a lot of people have this notion that can be detrimental to the shoulder, but it's actually really restorative. And we were starting with just PVC pipe or broomstick and working on, getting, hello everyone, working on getting just the arms back in that position. And then two, slowly working on controlling that range from, behind the back, don't hit the head on the way up, all the way to overhead. And then thinking about, pulling the bar, pulling the PVC pipe, whatever it was, pulling it back down into position, not just letting it go, willy-nilly, just pulling it back into position. And then, so those first two things, just the hanging and the pressing from behind the head, were basic setups to restore motion and function with some control. Then the other two things we had him do, because he could load like a dumbbell bench press um, and a barbell bench press eventually, but he could load that motion without discomfort and without creating a setback, and he could do some some rowing, like some one arm rowing, without setting them back or increasing symptoms. So we would warm up with the hanging and the pressing behind the head, and then turn around and a couple times a week just do some progressively loading bench press variation and rowing variation. And I said, so I'm going to set this up. So, you're hanging and pressing something light behind the head every day, and then you're dropping in these um, rowing and horizontal pressing movements a couple times a week, and we'll just see what happens, right? Because, like I said, you can always have surgery. Within 8 weeks, he was almost symptom free in that shoulder, sleeping without pain, getting his arms overhead without pain. He was actually starting to do, just starting to do some chin ups, not just hanging. And we were able to turn around and avoid surgical intervention, at least for the time being. I don't know. At this point, it's been probably 8 or 9 months since I've worked with him, because this is a remote situation, and still feeling good. No surgery as far as that goes. Will he have shoulder surgery in the future? Maybe. Will this kind of setup, this kind of a plan work for everyone? It depends on the person. Um, the people that it works for are people that are willing to be patient, be consistent, and slowly do the work, and wait and see if it pays off and removes their symptoms and keeps them out of surgery, months down the road. If people are willing to commit to some kind of timeline like that, and be consistent and purposeful in their efforts, they may be able to get there. Not everyone, but it was definitely more. It was a simpler but more robust plan of action than he'd ever been given by anyone else. Uh, the things he had been told to do in like a personal therapy situation were not really useful. And of course, the surgeon just said, "Well, just have surgery." And while that might quote repair that full thickness tear, it doesn't do anything to improve function, reduce symptoms, things like that. Because now you're even further behind from where you were, and it's going to take even longer to hopefully get back to those places where you're symptom free. So, no matter what somebody tells you about a situation, there's always somewhere you can start. There's always places you can find that you start doing some work. And as long as people are progressing, not having setbacks, and there's noticeable improvements in function and reduction in symptoms, the goal is always to put off surgical intervention, because by itself, that's a whole nother trauma and setback. So just things to think about. If you've been told you have a full thickness tear, those are some that I just went through, some easy things to try. Give it a shot, because you can always end up having surgery, but the goal would be to improve the situation yourself through consistent, progressed work. So with that, catch you next time. Check my channel for lots more cool videos on this kind of stuff, and I'll see you later.